how does power relate to transformative change? And more specifically, how can we understand this notion of transformative power? What is transformative power? Before we go into this concept of transformative power, it is important to emphasize that even though there's a lot of discussion and disagreement about what power means among social and political theorists, there's one thing that almost all power thinkers agree on, and that is that power is a social relation. And here we often think about two types of relation. A person exercises power over another person, or one person exercises more or less power than another. But there is a third type of power relation, and that is that different persons can exercise different kinds of power. And these different types of power relations can coincide, but not necessarily. Because even if you would have power, even if you would have more power than me in an absolute sense, that doesn't mean that you also have power over me, because it may well be that I happen to exercise one kind of power that you don't, and that gives me a particular independence from you. And this particular dynamic is very crucial to understand how innovation and transformative change can happen in the first place. One way to think about different kinds of power is to think about the resources that are being mobilized, where, for instance, economic power is about mobilizing monetary resources, or ideological power is about how mental resources are being mobilized, or geopolitical power about how natural and artificial resources are being mobilized. But another way to think about different types of power exercise is to think about how power relates to stability and change, where reinforcive power is the capacity to reproduce existing structures and institutions. So this is very much the power to defend the status quo. Prefigurative power, on the other hand, that's about innovative power. That's about the capacity to prefigure new ways of doing thinking and organizing, by which we mean the capacity to create new ways of new practices, new ideas, and new organizational forms, and to really do that in the here and now. So not just talk about it, but really just do it. And last but not least, we have countervailing power, which is the capacity to challenge and dismantle existing structures and institutions. And these different kinds of power involve inherently and qualitatively different things. We often have a tendency to think about power as something neutral. Either you have a little of it, of a lot, or a lot of it, and then you decide, am I going to use it for change or for stability? But here the argument is that they are qualitatively different, and that this also means that one actor that may have a lot of reinforcive power might not be the same actor that also had a lot of prefigurative or countervailing power. Furthermore, we then argue that transformative power is really about a particular combination of these three different types of power. So if we go to the example of energy transitions and social innovation in energy, prefigurative power, we see that, for instance, in community energy initiatives, people that get together and develop new ways of doing thinking and organizing energy. But we also see that there is reinforcive power, for instance, in starting new types of regulations and financial regulations. For instance, the feed-in tariff in Germany that enabled community energy initiatives to make their first investments and to make it financially viable. And here, the feed-in tariff is also a good example of why it's so important to reinforce this kind of new structures and institutions. Because you can develop a new regulation or a new financial scheme, but if it's not being reinforced and maintained and defended, if it gets abolished again, or if it gets significantly reduced, which is what also happened in Germany, you see that all these prefigurative power initiatives get in real trouble and cannot do their innovation. So reinforcive power is actually a prerequisite for innovation. Paradoxically, you need reinforcive power to be able to transform and innovate. And last but not least, you also need countervailing power, which is this capacity to challenge and dismantle existing structures and institutions in the energy sector. Because innovation and transformation is not just about adding new things, it's also about replacing things, and it's also about phase out, it's about breaking down things, it's about really putting an alternative somewhere. So countervailing power, which you see in all sorts of protest movements and those alternative initiatives that really challenge the existing systems. And here it's then important to emphasize that not every initiative needs to do everything. It can also be very much about different initiatives doing different things and complementing each other. So if we then relate this to this famous quote by Buckminster Fuller, who argued that you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Our notion of transformative power would emphasize that maybe you never change things by only fighting the existing reality, and you also need to build a new model. But still, we still also need the fighting. So we really need both. And transformation is really about combining the two.
Exercise 6, making transformative power into an exercise. So what we invite you to do is to prepare a list of the way that you recognize this prefigurative, countervailing, and reinforcive power in your own social innovation initiative or context. And we have some examples for you on how to do that. In the Power Guide in Annex 1, you can find the power vignettes with examples of different social innovation initiatives where we did that. Next up, you can formulate how these different kinds of power are exercised, and you can go through the following questions, discussing what is your strongest power, your best asset, if you will, what obstacles you identify in realizing these kinds of power, the gaps that you identify, as well as the opportunities for action, and also synergies and tensions that arise between these three forms of power. You can discuss that in groups of 4, but again, that is also up to you. How can your transformative be strengthened? What role can translocal power or intersectionality, as discussed in the Power Guide, so new connections with other kinds of social movements and issues play in this? And we advise that you take at least 45 minutes for this exercise to strengthen your consciousness of transformative power and the potential of it.